Rosalind, thank you very much. If you don't mind, I'll just sit down. The other way in which I'm different from the other presenters is that I don't have slides, I'm afraid, but there we are. I'd like to deal with this issue about the convention under 4 broad headings, starting by talking a little bit about the context in which the background to the establishment of the convention and the task we were given. Secondly, the conduct of it, how we proceeded with it, and the actual work programme. Thirdly, what came out of it? What were the recommendations in terms of recommendations for change? And finally, and this may be to connect a lot more with today, are there any overall lessons from it? So there are the 4 aspects in which I'd like to talk about. I mean, just a bit by way of the general background. I mean, everybody knows, I suppose, we are dealing with the Irish Constitution, which was passed in 1937, and that over a period of decades there was a growing recognition that the Constitution needed to be adjusted or amended in certain respects. And you had over the years various committees looking at ways in which it could be recommended. There was the committee in the late 1960s, the Doyle Committee. There was an important committee in the 1990s, chaired by distinguished people, chaired by Ken Whitaker. And subsequent to that, the Oireachtas Committee produced 10 different reports recommending changes in different aspects. The common thread in terms of reaction to all of these different reports was that nothing essentially happened. But thus it was that coming up to the 2011 election, all of the political parties had a commitment in their manifestos that they would reform, or they were committed to changing the Constitution in some or other way. And when the programme for government between the Fine Gael and Labour came out, there was indeed a commitment there that a constitutional convention would be set up. It took about a year before any action on that happened. And then what happened was that discussions between political parties about the format of the convention and about essentially what the convention should do. And this came into concrete form in an Oireachtas resolution in July of 2012, which established the principle that the convention would be of 100 people, that it would be 66 citizens chosen to represent the population, 33 politicians to reflect the respective strengths of the political parties, and an independent chair. The resolution also agreed what the agenda should be, that there would be 8 topics of which the convention would be required to examine and to either make recommendations for change or indeed confirm that the current wording in the Constitution was okay. The other commitment was, the other aspect of this resolution was the important thing of where this convention fitted in the overall process of change. And it could be seen as, if you like, a link in a 4-chain, in the chain that had 4 links. The convention would examine a topic, would make recommendations. The report that it would produce would be debated within the Oireachtas, within the Dáil, within 4 months of it being, of the report being made. That would in turn lead to a government decision whether to proceed or not to proceed if there was to be a change in the Constitution. And the further link of the chain would be a referendum. So that was, if you like, the status of the convention. It didn't have any more power than that. It had the power to recommend, and that was that. And so the citizens were chosen around about in September, October in 2012. I was asked to chair it in October 2012, and we had our first formal meeting of the convention in Dublin Castle on the 1st of December 2012. Now, what was interesting was that we were given what I've described there in terms of the agenda, in terms of the time frame, which was 1 year, in terms of the composition, etc. That was basically the guidance we were given. Apart from that, we were given a blank sheet as to how we would go about our business. So one of the first things to do, that when we had our first working session, I suggested that we would have 4 or 5 operating principles by which we would work. Openness, fairness, equality, efficiency, and collegiality. These principles, I think, turned out to be very important, and I'd like to just reflect a little bit on them and the importance that they had. Openness, because it was clear that this was needed to be a very open process. That we were asking for submissions from the public on each and every topic, and all of those submissions would be up on a website. Openness in terms of the way we conducted our affairs, in that we arranged for, as much as possible, all of the sessions to be streamed live so people could see what was happening. Fairness was of crucial importance because we were going to be dealing with topics of very considerable sensitivity. I suppose most specifically the marriage equality issue. And it was vitally important that we were not only fair, but seen to be fair to all sides of the argument. Equality was because there was, in the composition of the convention, there was politicians and citizens. And there was a feeling at the beginning that there was a risk that politicians would dominate. So when we talked about equality, we were really talking about equality of voice within the operation of the convention. Efficiency, because we had a lot to do in a short space of time, and the way we were going to work was convene on a Saturday morning and conclude on a Sunday afternoon. And to do whatever we had to do within that spirit, within that time frame. And then finally the issue of collegiality. The sense that here we were, 100 people, with a clear sense of common purpose, common task, and it was important we went about our business in that collegial way. So with those principles spelled out and agreed, we then looked at the way we actually worked. And it had 4 or 5 core elements to how we worked on a weekend. Firstly, we had recruited for each of the topics, I would say, the very best experts in the country. And these experts, in each case 2 or 3 or 4, as the case might be, were tasked in advance of the weekend to produce papers on the topic and to not take sides, to produce papers on any particular topics in very simple and clear language. And these were distributed to the convention members in advance. The experts who produced the paper were then available during the weekend, and typically we would start with the experts who had produced the papers making a presentation on the day. The other element that we had were advocates. So advocates, there would be always, for each topic, obviously there were arguments on both sides of the argument, and there were many more people who wanted to be advocates than there were places and time available. And one of our important tasks was, in fact, choosing advocates in particular areas. And then the actual process itself of, so typically we would have the experts, we would have the advocates, and then we would move to the consultation, the process of deliberation. And that was organized in terms of round tables. The 100 people were divided typically into 10 tables. And at each table we had a facilitator. A facilitator who was a part, if you like, of extension, briefed to make sure that the discussion was conducted in the proper spirit and that everybody had a voice. And we also had note takers, people who were capturing that discussion. So we're in process, and it is very important to say that these people, the facilitators and the note takers, played a critical role, because at the end of after each session, we would, a discussion session, round table session, we would have come back into plenary and report back to the wider convention. But that reporting back was done largely by what we call our academic and legal team, people who had helped us select the experts in the first place, and who were then working on the day with the facilitators and note takers to capture the essence of what was said. So we weren't going around to 10 tables and saying, please report back. We were providing a summary process. So that was how the weekend proceeded. And then on the Saturday night, Sunday morning, we, the Secretariat, and myself, and the academic and legal team, we had to frame the questions on which the convention would vote around midday on Sunday morning. And that became quite a task, because we weren't just framing the questions, we were framing the questions which the convention then had to vote on, that they were willing to vote on. So we had to get agreement on the questions that they would subsequently vote on. So that basically was a part of, that was how we did our work. Now, what did we do? Our 8 topics given, and I'll very quickly go through these just for completeness. The first question, it was the first weekend we met, we had 2 issues to deal with. The voting age, whether the voting age should move from 18 to 17. In fact, the convention decided by a small majority that it should go not to 17 but to 16. So this was already a first demonstration of perhaps the convention wishing to not so much extend its terms of reference, but I suppose taking a fairly liberal approach to the questions that we were asked. And that was partly because as we went through each of the topics, different aspects, I mean, any of these issues that we were dealing with, we found it very difficult to bring it down to a simple yes, no question and answer. And so that was the first time this was reflected. The second topic we dealt with on that first weekend was the presidential election. We were asked, could the term of the presidency move from 7 years to 5 years, and should then the presidential election be aligned with the European Parliament election? The conclusion, a very clear conclusion, while the recommendation was that no, it should remain at 7 years, and it should not be part and parcel of the process for the European Parliament. The second issue we dealt with in February was the issue of, if you like, women in the Constitution. The famous Article 41.2, which talked about the role of women in the home. By a big majority, that it was recommended that that should be changed. But there was a second dimension to that discussion, and it was the role of women in political and public life. Now, this wasn't something that was necessarily going to be reflected in constitutional change, but a range of things emerged from that discussion, recommending things that perhaps should be changed to enhance the role of women in political and public life. In April, we had the question of same-sex marriage, and again, it was a very detailed and passionate debate. The main outcome was that the convention recommended by 78%, 22%, in favour of a change in the constitution to allow for same-sex marriage. In May and June, we had 2 sessions which were covering the electoral system. Essentially, the question asked was, should the current system be retained, or should, if not, what alternative should be recommended in its place? The first weekend we examined 4 options and narrowed that down to 2, which we examined in more detail on the second weekend. Those 2 examined were essentially the one we have, the single transferable vote, and the second one examined was essentially the German system of the list system plus the election of individuals. There was a very strong conclusion that the system we had should be retained, with some variation. Suggestion that larger constituencies should also play a more important part. The fifth, but there was also, as that discussion went on, it became clear that if you were talking about electoral systems, you couldn't just confine yourself to talking about electoral systems. You also were slipping into the territory about how the whole legislative process worked, and in particular how Dáil and the eruptors worked. And a range of things emerged out of that, even acknowledging that there was no recommendation for any change in the electoral system. There was a whole raft of suggestions for other changes in the way the legislature worked. In December, we looked at whether the Irish abroad should have a vote in presidential election. By a strong majority recommended it should. In November, it was a little bit of a one-sided contest because the article dealing with blasphemy in the Constitution was examined. We found it very hard to find anyone to advocate for retaining that particular provision, but by a very, again, strong majority, it was recommended it should be taken out of the Constitution. So that was essentially, we'd done our work. But there was a strong feeling that there was some unfinished business. And we asked the government for an extension by 2 months. We had been given a year to complete our work. In effect, we had done our work in 10 months, but we felt that if we were to get a couple more months, we could do other things. So we were granted a 2-month extension to our mandate. And then the question was, what would we discuss? And for that, we involved a nationwide consultation. We held 9 public meetings around the country. Something about between 1,000 and 1,200 people turned up to that. And there were very significant debates as to what people wanted, because by this stage, people had a consciousness of the convention that it was doing, hopefully, potentially important work. And a number of people wanted, if you like, their topic to be examined by the convention. So, for example, we had, at each of our meetings around the country, each of our 9 meetings, we had somebody from the Irish Atheist Society who were advocating that all references to God should disappear. We had a very strong, when we got to the Midlands, we had very strong submissions from people who didn't like wind farms, who felt that maybe something should be said in the Constitution, which would in effect enable their point of view to be heard. And you know, interestingly, that showed that there were other countries in the world where indeed they had constitutional provision relating to the environment, and the argument was that this could be done here in Ireland. As it turned out, having considered, or having listened to the 9 groups and reconvened as a convention, the conclusion was that we should examine 2 additional topics. One was Dáil reform, and this was very much, I think, a connection to the fact that there was felt to be unfinished business about our discussions on the electoral system. And the second issue that to be discussed was economic, social and cultural rights. And we examined these 2 topics in early 2014, and then at the end of March 2014 we concluded. So what, if you like, in overall terms came out of this? Firstly, if you look at the recommendations made, the convention recommended that there should 18 different constitutional changes were recommended, covering across the range of 10 topics we had discussed, and 38 issues that could be dealt with not in the Constitution but by the legislature. A core part of the deal at the beginning was that the Dáil would examine each of our reports within 4 months of the reports being submitted. This started well for the first 3 or 4 topics. It then slipped, and it's fair to say that each of them were eventually considered, each of the reports, but some of the latter ones in a very cursory way. At a substantive level, obviously, the marriage equality referendum happened in May of 2015, along with another topic, which was to reduce the age at which somebody could stand for the presidency from 35 to 21. Now, we hadn't actually been asked to examine that issue, but it was one of the, if you like, side recommendations which emerged when we discussed the issue of the length of the presidential term. And the government, for some reason, decided to put that to referendum. It was fairly substantially defeated. The other issue that has been dealt with, or has been at least a commitment has been given on, is that the diaspora should have, or aspects of the diaspora should have voting rights in the presidential election. This certainly won't happen until the 2025 presidential election, and clearly there's a lot more work to be done before you get to that point. A whole raft of legislative changes which were recommended, which I don't have time to go into. So just to conclude then, what do I think are the broad lessons that maybe have emerged from this? Firstly, as an exercise of engagement, of participative democracy, it did seem to work in that there were very substantial engagements of individuals, interest groups who made submissions, and those submissions, I think, were examined carefully and read and presented to the convention members. I think our engagement with the public in terms of selecting additional topics, the 2 additional topics we ended up choosing, was also a useful exercise in democracy. One important issue to emerge is the question of the balance between citizens and politicians. There were, I suppose, a lot of skepticism at the beginning that the role of politicians would not be positive. By the end of the process, I think it's fair to say that both citizens felt that politicians had made a significant contribution, and indeed politicians had highly regarded the role of the citizens. And so that is, I mean, that's a really important matter, and I think there is then the fact that the subsequent Citizens' Assembly, the government decided that the Assembly should consist only of citizens. But it's clear that whatever the Citizens' Assembly comes up with is going to be considered by politicians. So there's 2 models here. One, that you build politician engagement into the work of the Assembly, or into the work of the Convention/Assembly, or secondly, that you do it like the Citizens' Assembly. And I think there's arguments for both sides of the argument. I'm happy to discuss that later. The process is, I think, very important. I think the fact that we had, if you like, established ground rules in the shape of 5 organization or working principles turned out to be very important. It was just discussed this morning issues of organizational design, and when you look at things like, for example, with the principle of collegiality. Now, what does that mean in practice? Part of it meant that providing sufficient space during the course of the conventions, working for people to get to know each other. We had a dinner every Saturday evening. Invaluable, I think, as it turned out. So again, I think that sort of thing is really important. Another organizational design issue was, I think, the relationship between the chair and effectively the head of the secretariat. I think that relationship needs to work, as in any sort of chief executive chairman relationship. It did work very well, I think, in the case of the convention, in that myself and the then head of the secretariat, we got on very well, but I think it is a crucial relationship. Are there elements about limitations about a model like this? Well, certainly I think there is a question that some big topics have to be dealt with and conclusions arrived at in what is effectively a very short space of time. One weekend to come up with big conclusions on big issues. Now, sometimes it worked to a greater or lesser degree, but one of the things I think that has to be concluded was that you need to invest in building the knowledge of the participants. And because in certain cases, the citizens in particular knew very little about some of the topics they were discussing. Finally, I think the question of how a process like this connects with the political system. I think what was very striking was when the reports of the convention were debated in the Dáil, that many of the TDs that had participated in the convention were very positive about the process. And so whether or not you have politicians engaged in the convention as such, or whether, as in the current Citizens' Assembly, that it's going to be, if you like, at arm's length, different in that they're going to consider the outcome of the report of the Assembly, you know, afterwards in the form of an Oireachtas committee. I think there needs to be as much clarity as possible about what that relationship is, and that there needs to be a positive relationship. If you're to achieve real change, you're going to have to make sure that the politicians have bought into this process and are committed to an outcome. And finally, and this connects a little bit to the participatory budget debate this morning, there was considerable international interest in the work of this convention. It was a serious innovation at Irish level. The only other examples we found in advance of that were something in British Columbia and Canada, in the Netherlands. But since it has happened, there's considerable interest in Europe, in Germany, in the Netherlands, as far afield as Korea. So I think the work of both the convention and the Citizens' Assembly in time needs to be properly documented and, you know, available. Some of the lessons learned need to be available for discussion in wider forum. Thank you very much.